When the police stopped and humiliated a dark school bus driver in front of the students, they thought no one would object. But the children did something no one expected, and their act set off a chain reaction from which there was no escape. What happened next turned everything upside down. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new stories. In the meantime, write in the comments. Where are you watching this vid from? The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Marlon Davis's modest house, casting soft golden rays across the living room. It was still early, and the neighborhood lay quiet in the sleepy haze of dawn. Marlon was already awake, moving silently through the house so as not to disturb his wife, Angela, who was still sleeping upstairs. He had always been an early riser, a habit that had followed him since his military days. Now, as a school bus driver, his mornings began just as early, though the stakes had shifted from battlefields to the bustling streets of the city. As he brewed a pot of coffee, Marlon allowed himself a brief moment of peace. The rich, earthy aroma filled the kitchen, grounding him. Today seemed like it would be just another regular day. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the same routine. Pick up the kids, drive them safely to school, and return them home. It was a job he had grown to love over the past 15 years. It wasn't just about the driving for him. It was about the kids. Many of them came from neighborhoods like his, where opportunities were scarce and life was tough. He saw it as his duty to offer them a brief respite during their rides, a sense of security and normalcy, even if only for the short time they were on his bus. He poured himself a cup of coffee and glanced out the window, watching as the first signs of life began to stir in the quiet streets. The houses, most of them worn by years of weather and hardship, had stood like sentinels in this neighborhood for decades. He knew most of the families who lived in them. Some struggled to make ends meet, while others had already lost the battle. But through it all, the kids, the ones who boarded his bus each morning, remained a flicker of hope. They were his responsibility, and that meant everything to him. Taking a sip of his coffee, Marlon let his thoughts drift to his own son, Jamal, who was away at college. He smiled to himself, feeling a swell of pride. Jamal was the first in their family to go to university, and Marlon had made sure that he had everything he needed to succeed. In many ways, driving that school bus had helped make that possible. Every paycheck, every hour spent behind the wheel, was another step toward ensuring his son had a better future. Finishing his coffee, Marlon glanced at the clock. It was time to go. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the kitchen chair and quietly stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The cool morning air greeted him as he made his way to the bus depot, where the familiar yellow buses lined up waiting for their drivers. The depot was alive with the sounds of engines warming up and drivers chatting about their routes for the day. Marlon greeted his fellow drivers with a nod and a smile, exchanging brief words as they prepared for their shifts. Despite the early hour, there was a sense of camaraderie here, a shared understanding of the responsibility they all carried. As he approached his bus, he ran his hands along the side, checking for any dents or damage from the previous day. It was a habit he'd developed over the years, one of those little things that made him feel in control. Satisfied that everything was in order, he climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The familiar rumble beneath his feet was comforting, like the steady heartbeat of a trusted companion. Pulling out of the depot, Marlon began his usual route through the neighborhood, picking up the kids at their designated stops. The bus quickly filled with the sounds of laughter, chatter, and the occasional argument. It was always lively, and Marlon wouldn't have had it any other way. He had learned each of the kids' names by heart, knew their families, their stories, their dreams. There was Darius, the aspiring basketball star who never stopped dribbling an invisible ball in the aisle. Layla, the quiet one who always sat at the front, nose buried in a book, and Marcus, the class clown who loved making everyone laugh, even when it wasn't the right time. Each of these kids had their own struggles, and Marlon knew it. That's why he made sure the bus was a safe space, free from the outside pressures of their lives. On his bus, they were just kids, free to be themselves, if only for the length of the ride to school. Today seemed no different as he picked up the last group of students. The usual banter filled the air, and Marlon found himself smiling as he caught snippets of their conversations. "You see that new game they just dropped?" Darius was asking Marcus from the back of the bus. "Man, I've been saving up for that. It's supposed to be lit," Marcus responded with a wide grin. Marlon shook his head slightly, amused. He didn't always understand their slang, but he appreciated the joy they found in the little things. As they drove through the city, the kids settled into their usual routines. Some talked, others listened to music, a few even dozed off. Marlon's mind wandered as he kept his eyes on the road, thinking about the weekend. He planned to visit Jamal at college, maybe catch a basketball game or just spend some time together. It had been a few months since he'd seen his son, and he missed him more than he liked to admit. But as they passed into one of the quieter neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city, Marlon noticed something unusual. A police car was trailing behind them, its lights off, but clearly keeping pace with the bus. At first, he didn't think much of it. It wasn't the first time a patrol car had followed him. Sometimes they just monitored school buses to ensure safety. But as he turned onto the main road, the police car's lights flashed on, and the siren gave a short, sharp wail. The bus immediately fell silent. Marlon's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he glanced into the rearview mirror. The kids were all staring out the windows, eyes wide, whispering to one another. "What's going on, Mr. D?" Layla asked softly from the front seat, her book forgotten in her lap. "I'm not sure," Marlon replied, keeping his voice calm. "Just stay seated. Everything's going to be fine." He pulled the bus to the side of the road and watched as the police car came to a stop behind them. Two officers stepped out, both white, both wearing the serious expressions that Marlon had come to know too well. A familiar sense of unease settled in his gut. This wasn't the first time he'd been pulled over by the police. He knew what was coming. He could feel it in the way they approached, the tension in their steps. One of the officers, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut, walked up to the driver's side window and knocked on it with more force than necessary. Marlon rolled the window down and looked up at him. "Driver's license and registration," the officer demanded, his tone clipped. Marlon nodded and reached for his wallet, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He handed the officer his license and the bus's registration, hoping this would be over quickly. But the officer didn't move. He stood there, flipping through the documents with a frown. "What's the problem, officer?" Marlon asked, careful to keep his tone polite. The second officer, a shorter man with a thick mustache, stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he peered into the bus. "Step out of the vehicle," the first officer ordered. Marlon's heart sank. This wasn't going to be simple. He could feel the kids' eyes on him, waiting, watching. He didn't want to make a scene in front of them, didn't want them to see him like this. But there was no way out now. Keeping his voice calm, he said, "Can I ask what this is about?" The officer's eyes hardened. "Step out of the vehicle." Marlon hesitated for only a second before he unbuckled his seatbelt and slowly opened the door. As he stepped out onto the sidewalk, the officer motioned for him to move toward the front of the bus, away from the kids' line of sight. But Marlon knew they were still watching, still recording every move with their phones. "Hands on the hood," the officer barked. Marlon did as he was told, feeling the cold metal of the bus's hood under his palms. His mind raced, trying to figure out how this had escalated so quickly. He wasn't speeding, hadn't broken any traffic laws. This was supposed to be just another routine day. Behind him, he heard the second officer talking to the kids, trying to assert control. "Everyone, stay in your seats. This is a routine check." But Marlon knew better. This wasn't routine. This was something else entirely. The cold metal of the bus's hood pressed into Marlon's palms as he kept his hands firmly planted, standing in silence. His heart pounded in his chest, but his expression remained calm, even though frustration gnawed at him. Years of experience had taught him that the wrong move, an angry word, a sharp gesture, could turn a tense situation into a nightmare. But this time the stakes felt higher. The kids on the bus were his responsibility, and they were watching everything. If this went wrong, the impact would be far worse than his personal humiliation. The officer with the buzz cut stood close behind him, his breath audible. Marlon could hear the faint scribbling of a notepad as the second officer, the one with the thick mustache, leaned against the bus and jotted down something with unnecessary slowness, dragging the moment out. "You driving this bus legally, huh?" the mustached officer asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks a little out of place. You don't fit the picture." Marlon swallowed the anger building in his throat. "I've got the paperwork. Everything is in order." His voice was steady, though the edge in it was impossible to miss. The officer didn't even glance at the papers. He gave a mocking chuckle. "Yeah, well, we've seen enough fake licenses to know when something's fishy." Behind him, through the windows of the bus, Marlon could hear the low murmur of the kids. Darius, the basketball star, whispered urgently to Marcus. "They're treating him like a criminal for no reason." From the back of the bus, Darius's voice rose. "This ain't right, Mr. D." "Quiet, Darius," Marlon called over his shoulder, trying to project calm even as frustration boiled under his skin. The last thing he wanted was for one of the kids to say or do something reckless. But it was too late. The buzz-cut officer snapped his head toward the bus and marched up to the door, yanking it open. "Everyone stay in your seats. No one moves. You hear me?" The kids froze, wide-eyed, some with phones in their hands, filming everything. The officer's gaze swept over them, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Put those phones away," he barked, but Darius refused. "Nah, man, we're recording. We got every right." "Shut that off right now, kid, or I'll—" "That's enough." Marlon's voice rang out with uncharacteristic force. The officer turned, his jaw tightening in irritation at being interrupted. Marlon met his gaze steadily, a flicker of anger now visible in his usually calm expression. "They're just kids," Marlon said, his voice low but firm. "This isn't necessary." The buzz-cut officer stalked back toward Marlon, standing uncomfortably close. "I'll decide what's necessary," he muttered, then, louder, "Hands back on the hood." Marlon complied, glancing sideways just long enough to see Darius holding his phone higher, still recording. Darius had that look in his eye, fierce, rebellious. Marlon knew that look. He'd seen it in boys growing up in neighborhoods like this, boys tired of being treated like criminals just for existing. "Why you acting like this, man?" Marlon asked the officer, his tone even but edged with exhaustion. "I'm just doing my job. These kids didn't do anything. The officer grunted. If everything's in order, this won't take long. But I gotta make sure you are who you say you are. Everything is in order, Marlin repeated quietly. You know that. The other officer circled back around and crossed his arms. Maybe, maybe not. We've got procedures, and we follow them. Marlin could see it now. This wasn't about procedures. It never was. It was about control. The officers had the power here, and they were making sure everyone, especially Marlin, knew it. Inside the bus, fear spread like wildfire. Layla, always the quiet one, clutched her book tightly to her chest, her face pale. Are they going to arrest Mr. D? She whispered to the girl next to her. Darius leaned into the aisle. Nah, they're trying to scare him. Marcus, the class clown, wasn't joking this time. They're not just scaring him, they're messing with us too. Marlin could hear the kids' whispered conversations through the open bus door, and it broke something inside him. They shouldn't have to see this. Shouldn't have to witness him being treated like a suspect just because of the color of his skin. The officer stepped back, glancing at his partner. You know what? I think we're going to need to take this guy in for further questioning, just to be safe. Marlin's stomach dropped. You can't do that, he said firmly. I've got kids on this bus. I'm their driver. Their parents are waiting for them at school. You can't just take me in. We'll find them another driver, the mustached officer replied with a shrug. Meanwhile, you're coming with us. The tension on the bus reached a breaking point. Darius stood up, his phone still filming. You're not taking Mr. D. He didn't do anything. The buzz-cut officer whipped around. Sit down, kid, or I'll... You'll what? Darius shot back, defiant. You're gonna arrest me too? The officer stormed toward the bus door, but Marlin quickly stepped between them, blocking the officer's path. That's enough, Marlin barked, his voice carrying a weight that made even the officer pause for a moment. They're kids, Marlin repeated slowly, enunciating every word. You're not laying a hand on them. The officer glared at him but didn't move. Behind Marlin, Darius kept the camera rolling, refusing to back down. The tension crackled in the air like electricity. Finally, the mustached officer sighed. Let's wrap this up before things get out of hand. Marlin exhaled slowly, the knot in his stomach tightening. He knew things were already out of hand, but at least for now, the kids were safe. The officers conferred briefly, speaking in low voices Marlin couldn't make out. After a moment, the mustached officer turned back toward him. All right, he said grudgingly. You can go, but next time, watch yourself. We'll be watching. Marlin bit back a retort and gave a stiff nod. Sure. As the officers returned to their patrol car, Marlin slowly walked back to the bus, every muscle in his body aching with tension. The kids watched him with wide eyes as he climbed into the driver's seat. You okay, Mr. D? Darius asked quietly from the back. Marlin forced a smile, though it felt like his face was made of stone. Yeah, kid, I'm okay. But inside, he knew he wasn't okay. Not really. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and it wouldn't be the last. And the worst part was knowing that the kids, those bright, hopeful kids, had to see it happen. He started the bus, the engine rumbling beneath him. All right, let's get to school, he said, trying to sound normal, like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. He could feel it in the silence that hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, and as he drove toward the school, his mind raced. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Marlin pulled the bus into the school lot, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than usual. The kids filed off in stunned silence, a stark contrast to their usual loud chatter. Darius gave him a nod of respect before stepping down, phone still in hand. Marlon forced a small smile, though inside he felt like a balloon stretched too thin, ready to burst. By the time Marlon parked the bus and headed toward the driver's lounge, the weight of what had happened hit him harder. It wasn't just another police stop. This was different. The kids were involved. They saw everything, and worse, they felt it. He knew how these moments could etch themselves into young minds, shaping their fears, their understanding of the world. He sat at a worn-out table in the lounge, clutching a bottle of water he couldn't bring himself to open. His phone vibrated with a steady stream of messages. At first, he thought it might be from Angela or Jamal, but as he scrolled through, the flood of notifications startled him. "Did this really happen?" one message read, accompanied by a link. Marlon clicked it. His heart sank as he saw a video thumbnail, the officer shouting, Marlon standing with his hands on the hood of the bus, and Darius filming from the aisle. The video was everywhere: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. It had already been shared thousands of times. People were enraged. "I thought this was just another day. Nope, not for us." The caption from Darius's post hit Marlon in the chest like a hammer. It had gone viral. The comments were relentless. "What the hell is wrong with these cops? That man was just doing his job. Fire those officers now. This is why we can't trust the system." Every refresh brought more messages, more outrage. Marlon's phone didn't stop buzzing. Activists had already picked up the video, organizing protests outside the police precinct. Local news stations were running the footage, and anchors were framing the incident as yet another case of racial profiling. Just as Marlon tried to process the situation, a call from the school principal interrupted him. "Marlon, we've got parents calling in. They saw the video." "I figured they would," Marlon replied, keeping his tone neutral despite the knot forming in his gut. "The parents are furious," the principal continued. "They want answers. Some are even on their way to the school right now." Marlon ran a hand over his face. "What do you need me to do?" "Just come by the main office. They want to talk to you." When Marlon reached the school's front office, several parents were already there, some pacing, others sitting with crossed arms. Their expressions shifted when they saw him. A few parents approached him with gratitude, thanking him for staying calm and keeping the kids safe. "We appreciate you, Mr. Davis," one mother said, gripping his hand tightly. "My boy told me everything. You stood up for them." "Thank you," Marlon muttered, the words heavy on his tongue, but not all parents were as composed. One father stormed toward Marlon, waving his phone. "You gonna tell me why my kid had to sit through this nonsense?" he demanded. "You think this is okay?" Before Marlon could respond, another parent stepped between them. "Oh, hold up. That wasn't his fault. You saw the video. They went after him for no reason." Arguments erupted among the parents, voices rising until the principal intervened, raising his hands for silence. "Please," he said, "we're all on the same side here. Let's focus on what matters, making sure this doesn't happen again." Outside, the protests had already begun. A small crowd gathered in front of the police precinct carrying signs that read, "Fire the officers," and "Justice for Marlon." News vans lined the street, and reporters jostled for space. Darius, never one to stay quiet, had joined the protesters. He held a hand-painted sign that read, "Our driver, our hero." A local reporter approached him for an interview, and Darius didn't hesitate. "Mr. D always looked out for us," he told the camera, his voice steady despite the fire in his eyes. "He didn't deserve what happened today. None of us did. The interview spread like wildfire. Within hours, #Justice for Marlon and #Respect Her Drivers were trending across social media. Meanwhile, Marlon's phone buzzed again, this time from a familiar number. "Angela?" he answered. "You okay, baby?" Her voice was filled with worry. "I saw the video. Jamal saw it too. He called me. He's furious." "I'm okay," Marlon assured her, though the exhaustion was evident in his tone. "It's been a day." "You're a good man, Marlon. I just hate that they keep doing this to you." "Yeah," Marlon whispered. "Me too." The day dragged on, and as the sun set, the protest outside the precinct only grew louder. More parents and students joined, standing in solidarity with Marlon. The police chief issued a brief statement, calling the officers' actions under review. But that wasn't enough for the crowd. They demanded accountability, not empty promises. As Marlon sat on the edge of his bed that night, exhaustion weighing heavily on him, the enormity of the day settled over him like a thick fog. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about every child on that bus, every person who had ever felt the sting of unjust suspicion. His phone buzzed one last time before he set it aside. It was a message from Darius. "You always told us to stand up for what's right. Just following your lead, Mr. D." Marlon exhaled slowly, the knot in his chest loosening just a bit. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to smile. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but at least he knew he wasn't standing alone. The morning after the protests, Marlon woke to the sound of his phone buzzing nonstop on the bedside table. Messages poured in from everywhere, journalists asking for interviews, parents sending words of support, activists calling for him to join their cause. He felt the weight of it all before his feet even hit the floor. Angela stood in the doorway, arms crossed, concern etched into her face. "Marlon, you need to see the news." He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. Angela handed him her phone, the screen already showing a live broadcast from the local station. Overnight, protests outside the precinct grew larger as community members demanded justice for Marlon Davis, the school bus driver stopped and humiliated by police in front of children, the reporter announced. The police department has released a statement saying the officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. However, the public is calling for immediate firings. Marlon handed the phone back with a sigh. "They're just trying to cover themselves," he muttered. Angela sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "They know they messed up. They just don't want to admit it." He nodded slowly, feeling both exhausted and restless. The situation had spiraled far beyond what he could have imagined. It wasn't just about him anymore. It had become a symbol. Another reminder of the systemic injustice that people like him faced every day. Later that morning, the school principal called. "Marlon, I need you to come in," he said, his voice careful. "There's something you should see." When Marlon arrived at the school, a crowd had gathered outside. Parents, students, and community members filled the front lawn, holding signs and chanting for justice. The energy in the air was electric, charged with anger but also with hope. The principal met him at the door. "Come on," he said, leading Marlon toward the auditorium. "The kids wanted to do something for you." Marlon followed, his heart heavy with anticipation. When he entered the auditorium, the sight before him took his breath away. The students, those same kids he had driven every day, had organized a rally in his honor, banners reading "Our driver, our hero," stretched across the stage. Darius stood at the microphone, his usual playful expression replaced with one of seriousness. "We're here today because what happened to Mr. D was wrong," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "He's always been there for us. Now it's our turn to be there for him." The auditorium erupted in applause. Marlon sat in the front row, overwhelmed by the support. His eyes stung, but he blinked back the tears. These kids, his kids, had taken a stand, and they weren't backing down. After the rally, parents approached him with hugs and words of encouragement. "We've got your back, Marlon," one mother said. "You're part of this community, and we won't let them treat you like this." The support gave him strength, but the fight wasn't over. That afternoon, Marlon received another call, this time from the police chief. "Marlon," the chief began, "I wanted to apologize personally for what happened. I've reviewed the footage, and I agree, it was unacceptable." Marlon listened in silence. "We're going to release a public apology," the chief continued, "and the officers involved will be dismissed. I just wanted to tell you first." Marlon exhaled slowly, his body finally relaxing. "Thank you," he said simply. It wasn't a victory, not entirely, but it was a step in the right direction. Later that evening, the community held a candlelight vigil outside the police precinct. Marlon stood among the crowd, Angela by his side, as they lit candles in silence. The flickering flames cast soft, warm light on their faces, a symbol of hope in the face of darkness. When it was his turn to speak, Marlon stepped forward, his heart full. He looked out at the faces of the people who had stood with him through the storm. The kids, the parents, the activists, even strangers who had seen the video and felt compelled to act. "I didn't ask for any of this," he began, his voice steady, "but I want to thank each and every one of you, not just for standing up for me, but for standing up for what's right." He paused, glancing at Darius and the crowd. "This fight isn't over," he continued, "but today we took a step forward, and as long as we keep standing together, we'll keep moving forward." The crowd erupted in applause, and Marlon stepped back, feeling lighter than he had in days. Angela squeezed his hand, and he gave her a small, grateful smile. The next morning, Marlon returned to his bus, his usual route waiting for him. As he pulled up to the first stop, Darius was there, waiting with a grin. "Ready for another ride, Mr. D?" Darius asked as he climbed aboard the bus, his phone tucked away this time. Marlon chuckled, feeling a warmth in his chest that hadn't been there in days. "Always ready, kid. Let's get moving." The other kids piled onto the bus, their usual energy restored. The chatter and laughter filled the space, creating the comforting hum of normalcy. As Marlon navigated the familiar streets, he reflected on everything that had happened. The anger, the protests, the fear, it had all been real. But so was the support, the solidarity, and the strength he had seen in the people around him. He knew this wouldn't be the last time he'd face prejudice. The system wouldn't change overnight, and there would be more challenges ahead. But now, he felt something he hadn't in a long time, a sense of hope. Not just for himself, but for the kids on this bus, for the community that had rallied behind him, and for everyone fighting the same battle. As the bus rolled toward the school, Marlon glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the kids. They weren't just passengers on his route. They were his responsibility, his joy, and his reason to keep going. He smiled to himself. We're going to be okay. Because for every obstacle they threw in his way, Marlon knew now that he wasn't facing it alone. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed it and want to see more stories like this, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new episodes. We have many more exciting stories to come. Go to the next videos and discover more inspiring stories. See you in the next installment.